So, first of all, it was wonderful to be here. Hey Dan, how you doing? Nice to see you. Nice to see you. It's really wonderful to be here this evening. I look forward to trying to share some ideas for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, something like that. Just about the program. When I think about the origins of this program, it takes me back to the beginning of my, I guess, career. It's a weird word to use, but my career as a rabbi and as an educator, and that I saw a very strange dynamic happening. If you look historically at the history of the Jewish people, without being too facetious about it, they have that joke they say, right? That every Jewish holiday is like they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat, right? So, and that's cute, right? But if you look at Jewish history, it kind of works like this. We're oppressed. We go to a country where we don't have any infrastructure. Massive assimilation takes place. We build infrastructure. I didn't want to get into this with the whole ritual versus thing, but without infrastructure, I mean, it was to me, it's ironic to be talking about how we don't need infrastructure and ritual in this building of infrastructure, right? In other words, these are complicated questions, very complicated questions. So we have an impoverished society that falls apart. Some people manage somehow to bring the message from the old days, and through financial success rebuild, and then what tends to happen is as follows: as the problems that face the society, financial problems in the West, it's going to be much more connected. The problems of the people in the West are going to be connected to the ethics of the West, and therefore people in the West are going to be very concerned about financial stability, cultural climatization, etc., etc. Those are the kind of holy grails of Western thought. Therefore, Jews moving into the West are beginning to be concerned with that. People establish a tremendous amount of financial success, and then assimilation starts again. Boom, 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 boom. Right, and this is just a cycle that keeps on going. Whether we move from country to country or whether we stay in a country, and it's the easiest way of understanding why over thousands of years, the combinations of death and destruction, of murder and of pogrom and of oppression, plus our own assimilation, that was still such a small nation, because it doesn't make that much sense if you think about it. So I've dedicated my life to, so far, actually part of my life, I guess, because it didn't really start when I was in my mid-20s, thinking about this, to this question of how do we encourage Jewish continuity in a real way. And I spent the first, kind of 15, 17 years of my career as a rabbi working from a theological standpoint, spending time with people who are less religious, not religious, unconnected, disinterested, and using, I guess, from an intellectual standpoint, to try and show people the basis and the foundations. And I saw over time that this is becoming less and less and less effective. Just less and less effective. Because it's almost as if people did not want to be Jewish just because it was right, just because it was correct. That was not enough for people who, through just the reality of their lives, were becoming more and more assimilated, more and more affected. So after a while, I was thinking about this a lot, and I realized that the thing that kind of makes Jewish people, or often causes Jewish people to struggle so much to remain connected to the ethics and the values of Judaism in their practices and in their behaviors, is just what assimilation really is that very slowly and kind of gently your values get switched out. They just get switched out. A Jewish value gets switched out with a non-Jewish value. And I'm not talking about the rights and the wrongs of it, just the pure mechanics. Just, it gets switched out, it gets switched out, it gets switched out. And before you know it, what you're looking at is a person whose most of their values are very Western. They're very Western, or they're very Asian, or they're very, wherever it is that the person landed. Within a very short period of time, core values get switched out that make a vibrant Jewish life pretty much impossible for a person. because they just don't look at the world that way. They just don't really look at the world. Now, anyone that's in a marriage or has been in a relationship knows what that's like, because when you get into a relationship with a person, you come in with a series of assumptions about what marriage is supposed to be. What care sounds like or feels like. What love, right? Now, you're dealing with a person who has a different metaphor for those ideas, and they'll do acts that to them are an act of care, and to you are an act of irritation, right? Or vice versa, right? This happened in my life. I grew up, birthdays were not a big deal. Just not a big deal. Like, happy birthday, son. Thanks, Dad. And I really didn't mind. It was what it was, you know. And I get married to a woman, an amazing woman, and birthdays was a big deal. Birthdays was a big deal. So I'm like, happy birthday, hon. And she's like, no. Right? I'm like, well, I don't understand. What did I do? Yeah? Now, I just want you to understand that, okay? You walk down the street in Mea Sharim, in Yerushalayim, and you see an old man, dirty clothes, lives in a poor apartment, yeah, who's dedicated his life to study, yeah, and a Western-minded person would call that guy a bench warmer, a guy who wasted his life. You understand? Because he takes stocker from people. He can stand on his own 2 feet, right? And that guy might look at the Western person and say, the guy sacrificed all of his meaning and his wisdom so he could have 18 couches and 46 cars? Like, who cares? The guy doesn't know the definition of success, the definition of happiness, the definition of love, the definition of meaning, the definition of giving. Well, what's he got? Enough couches that he can distract himself from the fact that he doesn't know how to love his kids? Like, what happened? So who's right? It's a meaningless question. It's just life, if that makes any sense. It's just life. Right? And any parent that brings up a child and is shocked by the fact that it's not obvious to the child the things that are obvious to the parent understands how that feels. I grew up in a family where, you know, where you just don't marry someone not Jewish. Yeah? And many of my friends grew up in families like that. And the parents were flabbergasted when the kids did that. But the kids turn to the parents and say, I don't understand. We drive to synagogue, we eat whatever we want, we do whatever we want. The Torah is not true. Oh, this bit of the Torah is true? Are you insane? And the parent says, no, really, it's all true. We just couldn't, I didn't expect you would go that far. And the kid goes like, what are you talking about? If that makes any sense. Yeah? I don't know if this makes any sense to you. This is the stuff that I've been struggling with kind of professionally all of my, all of my years. So the truth is, from a Jewish perspective, the way I understand it, is the Jewish nation were gifted with the Torah that comes from Hashem, and embedded in the Torah really are the values that will build an ideal society, a utopian society, for the Jewish people and for the non-Jewish people. And assimilation, therefore, needs to be understood not simply as, "Oi, that's so terrible, they don't keep Shabbat anymore," or, "Oh, that's so terrible, they don't do this anymore," but rather as a loss of a soldier in a battle for values that is much more significant than what takes place in our own little circles, if that makes any sense. So what Amos is talking about, if I can go back to what the doctor was talking about, when he says, your sacrifices and that's what happens. That's what happens when people lose sight of the broader message. They're not exclusive. They don't need to be exclusive. They're supposed to be together. So when I founded Justifi, what occurred to me was, and I'll explain a little bit about what the program is that the Jewish people are a people of unparalleled genius. It's unparalleled genius. But we have to unlock that genius in people, and we have to get that creativity flowing. So that people, of course in their business lives, in their professional lives, but in their religious lives and their ethical lives, can start to access that and use that to help us build towards this noble mission of the Jewish people. We can't build a perfect world without you. We can't. It's not, it's not possible. Or without yourself, sir. Or without you, Daniel. We can't build a perfect world. We can't. It's not. That's what it means. Unity. It's not going to happen. Okay. So assimilation needs to be understood in those in that context. And therefore, I founded a program, and the goal of the program was to take people to places, into environments. Number one, where people really want to go and they really want to travel. They really want to have an amazing time. And I think, hopefully you hear from the people, hopefully they won't lie to you just because I'm here and they're embarrassed. But I think people do. I think people travel to amazing places. We're operating at the moment in Thailand, Nicaragua, Peru, South Africa, and Sri Lanka. And people go and have a beautiful time. We have a formula to how we run the programs, to be in at least 3 cities and to experience the culture in different ways. But the second thing is that we try and pick an ethical or social issue that is really a kind of an impossible one that's just really hard to look at and just be like, whatever. Things like human trafficking, child slavery, government, tremendous amounts of government corruption, things like, just lack of access to clean water, and those types of things that are really relatively should be somewhat easy to solve. And the point of that, and showing people, generally non-Jewish organizations that are working in these environments and really trying hard, people who are generally Western people living in foreign environments, trying to make a real difference in these areas, is to try and show people a little bit that your life can be different than what you thought it needed to be. That you could be a successful, contributing, amazing part of society and do something truly incredible with your life that is changing the lives of other human beings. I also wanted to show people something that I think is really very significant and a little difficult, subtle maybe, to get our heads around here. But when I stand here today, and if I showed you slides, which I'm not going to, of 13-year-old girls, in trafficking situations, or boys, or the little place in Chiang Mai in northern Thailand where children are for sale, little children are for sale, right in the public area, right? Or we're going to the slums of Peru and show you a family mourning the loss of a child that just fell down a well because the government won't ship the water up into the a couple of miles up into the mountains, because they don't have access to clean water, right? You see, what happens in those situations, I think, or the idea at least, if I told you about that now, then you walk outside and you click your clicker in your car and you get in your car and you drive home and you say, it's not so bad. That's not so bad. That's over there and it's not here, right? It's very hard to make an impact on people as to what happens when bad values are allowed to run their course until you go and you see what it's really like. So just to give you an example of this, I had a religious woman on a program once in Thailand, and she said to me, Rabbi, I want to tell you the truth. I truly struggle with tzniut. I struggle with it. I really struggle with how to present myself, how to keep Jewish law, this, that, and the other. She goes, but this trip has really given me a completely different perspective on it. So I said, well, why? She goes, because I understand the sexualization of life now in a different way. And I now understand that every time I put on a skirt, I'm really punching human trafficking in the face. I'm taking a step towards the non-objectification of the female, in her own mind, in the way that she saw it, if that makes any sense. So the Justifi program, most people who come on the Justifi program are not aware of the kind of type of thinking that I have behind it, right? But the idea is to take a person on a journey where they see values played out ad absurdum, where they meet human beings that are making a decision with their lives to try and fight it. Where people can come to terms a little bit with a part of themselves that on some level maybe does some of these things. Not God forbid, in the extremes, but personally on some level. And that people can begin to understand the Jewish values that would correct this ethical violation. Begin to think a little bit about how themselves, we as a society, are supposed to try and address those problems. So, a traditional Justifi trip works something like this. People will probably hear about us on Facebook, and they'll apply to come on the trip, and we'll meet them in the town, we'll meet them in the country that we're going to. And we're going to introduce them to either 2 or 3 different approaches to the social issue. In general, a social issue is going to be attacked from one of 2 directions. One is what I would call invasive, and the other is called more preventative. Invasive would mean something like, this organization rescues women who've been trafficked, right? And they're generally less effective and can reach less people. A preventative program is going to be something like, we run amazing after-school programs in these impoverished areas so that the kids get better English skills, so they're more likely to stay in school, so they finish high school and they go to university and they're never poor and they never have to sell themselves down into the cities, which will affect loads of people, right? And one of the ideas is that people who come on the program should start to feel, well, when I come back into my society, into Beth Torah, into Brooklyn or into London or into Jerusalem, wherever it is that they're from, there are problems there too. There are problems of Holocaust survivors who don't get visited. There's a big problem with that in Israel, with impoverished Holocaust survivors, right? There's problems of domestic abuse. There's all kinds of, there's food, there's all kinds of terrible problems. Invasive, preventative. Where's my passion? What do I care about within my own community or even in the broader world? How do it gives a little bit of skill, it gives you a little bit of perspective on different ways to start thinking about problems. The second thing is for people to try and understand the root causes of the problems from a Jewish perspective. So I'm going to give an example. When you talk about something like human trafficking, so most people say as follows, that is just absolutely terrible and they should make it illegal. So the answer is, well, it is illegal, yeah? So it's like, oh no, don't tell me that. You mean all these policemen are all on the take? And yes, they are. Yeah, yes, they are. So you say, well, we've got to stand at the airport in Bangkok, and any single white man who comes off any airplane, we're going to get in his face and we're going to tell him he's a bad person. I'll tell you a funny story. I was on the airplane once flying out to run a trip to Thailand, and I'm seeing all these like single men in their 40s and their 50s on this airplane going to Thailand, and I'm like, oh man, you guys are gross. I know exactly where you're. And then I looked at myself, I'm like, well, you're a single man in your 40s going to Thailand, like maybe they're like you don't really know. It was a kind of a realization for me. So he's saying, we're going to stand at the airport. You say, well, that's not going to work. We've got to just make it so socially acceptable. I said, but then the bad guys are going to go to Cambodia. Well, we'll do it in Cambodia too. Well, then they're going to go to Vietnam. Well, they'll do it. Well, then they're going to go to India. Like, good luck. There's 1 billion people there. Like that stuff doesn't really work. Right? It doesn't really work. If you want to correct a behavior from a Jewish standpoint, you have to get into something called self-regulation. Self-regulation is, I choose not to do this. Not because it's illegal, but because it's wrong, if that makes any sense. Which is really the Jewish approach to Tikkun Olam. It's by our education, getting people to make the correct ethical choices, even if they can get away with it. If that makes any sense. So we're trying to introduce those types of ideas whilst having a tremendous amount of fun, having a kind of a beautiful time running around the world in these beautiful places and seeing these contradictions and trying to bring them home in a way that would kind of push people towards a more idealistic life, a more sophisticated definition of success, a more sophisticated definition of what ethical living looks like. Right? And I think that from a Jewish standpoint, this is a very challenging question because it's almost as if looking in to our own communities and looking outwards to other communities, they're almost as if they're seen as some kind of contradiction. And I really don't think that they are. I'm unaware of any country anywhere in the world, please correct me if I'm wrong, that's giving more than 1 or 2% of its GDP in foreign aid. I'm unaware of, I don't even know if it's that much. I think America has one of the lowest actually, strangely enough, but as a Jewish community, we're constantly giving ourselves a hard time about the fact that 95% of our resources go towards helping I think that's very normal, and I think that's very natural. And I'll tell you something else. I think most families spend 95% of their own income on their families, not on everybody. Right? I think it's a very normal and natural thing. Sure. But I think the fundamental question, right? The fundamental question that we have to try and address as a community is, how can we play a balanced role in what it means to be a Jewish person, what it means to be an ethical ambassador in the world, and most importantly, perhaps, in this time of kind of unparalleled financial success, what does it mean to think a little bit less obsessively about ourselves and a little bit more obsessively about how to solve the problems of the world from an ethical perspective? How do we end the suffering of these human beings? So I want to, it's a difficult thing to encapsulate this in a short period of time, but I want to kind of tell you a story of something that happened to me in Thailand over a period of 3 years that to me was kind of really life-changing, and the guys that came with us to Thailand knew this person that I'm going to talk about now. He passed away a couple of years ago. So when I first came to Thailand, which is now 8.5 years ago, we hired a gentleman to be our tour guide and his wife to be our chef. We have kosher cooking up there, but so I prepare all the, check for bugs and this and the other, but we hired a Thai chef and made sure that they were only using the proper good. We brought all pots and pans in our own little kitchen and this that and the other, so everything could be kosher. That's just another point, by the way. On the Justifi trip, we do everything in a way that allows for all Jews to come and enjoy. Unfortunately, out there in the Tikkun Olam world, it's actually very difficult for people that keep kosher to travel with Jewish organizations, because the Jewish organizations don't take care, often, not always, do not take care of kashrut needs for Orthodox people. So a lot of Orthodox people find themselves really excluded from travel with overtly Jewish organizations. They'll do, it's vegetarian or this, that and the other. But so I said, no, not just because I'm a frummer, but I said if we're running a program, I want it to be something that I want it to be actually inclusive. Rather than talking about inclusivity and then excluding Jews, let's actually make something that's truly inclusive, right? Talk about ethics whilst, leaving half the Jews behind, the ones that actually want to, God forbid, keep dietary laws because they're so archaic, right? I thought that was horrific, and that was very frustrating. So we hired this woman as our chef, this guy as our tour guide. And he's an amazing guy. His name's Tom. He's an amazing guy. He was from the Karen Hill tribe, who and which is a kind of an indigenous people from Burma and Myanmar and Thailand, and he married a Thai woman, this woman called Mop. Anyway, after about 2 years, he sat me down and he said, Jamie, I want you to know I need to ask your forgiveness. So I said, why? He goes, I thought you were a liar. So I said, what are you talking about, Tom? I thought we were friends. He goes, I thought you were just another one of these foreign liars that come here and pretend to do all your charity work and you're just enriching yourselves, right? He said, but I see that you mean it. I see that you mean it. I really see that you mean it. And I hope you don't mind, he says to me, but I've been listening to your classes. And I wanted to know, can I get a Torah in Thai, please? So I said, Tom, I just don't know if there is one. I'll try really hard to look. I just have no idea. And I looked all over the internet. I just wasn't able to find a Torah in Thai. He said, well, do you mind if I tape your classes? Because I really want to listen. I've not heard wisdom like this before. It's not my wisdom. This is wisdom that my teachers taught me. We teach people about effort versus comfort. We teach people about depth versus superficiality, meaning versus the mundane. We talk about a hierarchy of values and learning how to make choices. These are fundamental ideas to Jewish life. He'd never heard anything like this before. So I came a little bit later, like a year later, and he said, Jamie, I've made a decision. I never told you this, but in my village, there's a terrible problem of human trafficking. And I didn't think I could ever do anything about it, but you said in your classes that any man can change the world. So I decided that I'm going to set up an after-school program in my village. And I've built a fish pond, because many of the families in my neighborhood cannot afford to feed their children. And I filled it with catfish. And my wife makes a fish curry right the way through the summer holidays every day, and the kids come to learn English, and we feed them. And the parents think that they pretend that we're feeding them because the kids come to classes. We know the parents are sending them to classes so the kids get food. Yeah. And they built a model of after-school education that was supposed to lift the kids a little bit out of poverty, based on another model that he'd seen with us of a Christian organization operating in the same area called the Soul Project. And the Soul Project dropped the high school dropout rate in the region from 55% to 7% over 7 years, which is an amazing accomplishment. Anyway, his wife Mott this program became so successful that she was elected to local government and charged with instituting an after-school program just like this in all the villages around the neighborhood. Okay? So about 2 years after that, no, about a year after that, it was just after your program, I think it was just a year after your program. So Tom called me up and I said, Tom, how you doing? He goes, not great. So, that's right, he'd stopped drinking, he'd stopped smoking, he'd really changed his life around, he became like an honored man in his village. He was Buddhist, his wife became more of a religious Christian. They straightened out a lot of their lives. So I said, how you doing, Tom? He says, not great. I have liver cancer. Okay, so I know what that means. Generally speaking, that's not a good cancer to have, if there is such a thing. So I sent the medical stuff over to a close friend in the UK who's a senior doctor involved with different types of tumours and this, that, and the other. And he just said, Jamie, there's just nothing that you can do over here. There's nothing you can do over here. So I called him up and I said, so what are we going to do? He goes, well, I went to the doctor and they really don't think there's much they can do for me, but I'm from the Cowland tribe and we have a way of meditating and using herbs and maybe that will help. So I called him like every week or so and he's just getting worse and worse and worse. We had a program in December, so I decided to go out a week early so I could see him before. It was obviously, well, anyway, so I drove there with the guy that I was running the program with at the time, a guy called Steve, and we drove there together, and there's Tom, this strong, lovely man, just shrunken and lying on his little bed, and I'd flown from Israel and driven through the night to get to his house, and it's the whole thing. I held his hand and he goes, Jamie, I'm really worried about my family. Can you promise me that you're going to look after them, because I don't know how I'm going to do it if I'm gone, like how they're going to make it. I want my girls to go to university. So I said, I'm going to speak to all of the people in Justifi and I'm really confident that we're going to be able to look after. And he said, well, I've done a calculation and I need this much money every month for them to be able to not lose the house and not lose the car and be able to, right? So thank God, by the way, just as a side point, the Justifi community responded really beautifully and we were able to send that amount of money every month to them, which looked after them. So I said to him, don't worry, it's on me, we're going to look after them. And he goes, okay, I think I'm going to die now. I'm telling you, this is really happening to me. I'm going to die now. So I said to him, no, you're not. I've just flown halfway around the world to see you and you're going to go to sleep and I'm here in the morning and we're going to have breakfast together, we're going to talk, and when I've gone, maybe if you want to. Yeah, I made a joke out of everything. So in the morning, he woke up and I said to him, and this is why I'm telling you this story, because I think this exemplifies it more than it. And I said, it's a short amount of time and you don't know me and I don't know you, and I hope this has given you some kind of flavour for kind of what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. So in the morning, he said to me, Jamie, can you pick me up? I want to look over there. Now, outside of Tom's house is the most magnificent mountains and rice paddies. It's a truly beautiful view. So we picked him up in his chair and we carried him out and we had him face the rice paddies. And he said to me, no, not that. And he wants me to look at this wall of this. We've been building buildings in his compound for a few years at that point to house the after-school program. He said, I want to look at the new roof. So it's like this corrugated iron roof that is put on a building that we built for the school. So he said, yeah, that's what I want to look at that. And I said, why, Tom? And he goes, because that's my accomplishment. That's my accomplishment. And I remember Steve just lost it at that point. He was crying to the side, and maybe I've just been a rabbi for too long, or maybe I'm more jaded, or I don't know what it is. So I held his hand and we looked at his roof. We looked at the roof that we built together. And he said to me, you've been a good friend and we've done amazing things together, and I'm just so happy that we met you and this and that. So we left and we went home. We went back to Bangkok, and about 3 or 4 days into the program, unfortunately, Tom passed away. But I was really moved by that final statement of his. And I say that, Justifi runs in 5 different countries. We take people, we take people, there's no judgment on our program, there's no theology on our program, there's no pressure on our program. It's religious Jews and non-religious Jews and Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardi Jews and men and women and all kinds of denominations and ages, 18 to 35. It's all united by a searching, number one, just to enjoy travel, just to be expanded, just to get out of your comfort zone and be somewhere beautiful where people do things differently and just expand. There's so much pressure on young people today to succeed, to finish high school, to go to yeshiva, to go to college, it's all West. There's no perspective. It's hard for people just to get out and to see a broader way of looking at things is really valuable for people. Number 2 is to really interact with the ethical questions that face developing societies and, in truth, our societies. Human trafficking is worse in America than it is in Thailand. Just no one talks about it here. Okay? It's happening right now. You go to any newspaper, for sure, within a mile of this synagogue. For sure. There'll be locked brothels. People who are chained. For sure. And there's no question about it. Yeah? There's no question about it. And another mile, and another mile, and there's no question about it at all. At all. There were kibbutzim in Israel that got prosecuted a couple of years ago because they had foreign workers that they kept chained up and they weren't paying and making them. This is everywhere. This stuff is everywhere. In Israel, it's everywhere, right? But to interact a little bit more intelligently with just the realities of what our society is all built on. Number 3, to develop in yourself a little bit more of a warrior, a little bit more of a warrior that wants to fight for ethics and wants to fight for a better world, and fight for the Jewish people, and fight for the mission of the Jewish people, and for themselves to have more meaningful lives, more balanced lives, less desperate lives. Just less desperate lives with this fear of poverty that's not real, for most of us. But instead trying to be broader and more open and this, that and the other. So, we founded the program with kind of those types of goals and those types of ideas in mind. What was so powerful about Tom was seeing a person who had absolutely no reason to buy into anything that we were doing. But because he was open, he heard what we were teaching, and he changed. And that was really amazing to me, because I'm like, we don't change, none of us change, right? It takes us forever. One more minute, yeah? And then, as he passed away, just to see what he really cared about. Just to see what he really cared about. Then in the end, with everything, all the views and all the amazing stuff that was surrounding him, the thing he wanted to look at as he passed away was what he'd done for other people. In the end, that was what he cared about. And I think that educating our families, educating ourselves, our children, whatever it is, to really be people who understand that the fundamental success of a human being is measured in terms of their hierarchy of values. It's measured in terms of their sophistication, the way that they see the world, the way that they think, the way they respond to ethical questions, and bottom line, the difference they make to others. That is an educational lesson that in truth I think is lacking in our community, in every community, not just the Jewish community. That your success is in the difference that you make to others. That's really the definition. That's in the end what matters to every human being. No one wants how many, degrees they have on their tombstone. But they do want how many hospitals they built for the orphan. That's how we function. It's true and it's real. And we need to get that message in to ourselves and to our families, to our communities more and more and more, because that unleashes the genius inside all of us, the Jewish genius, the ethical genius, the Torah genius, and that allows us to apply that to try and fix the problems that we see, that we're aware of. Each one as an individual, we all see different things. So on a kind of a high level, that's a little bit behind what we do over here at Justifi.